DevelopSec, Developing Security Awareness with James Jardine, brought to you by Jardine Software. Hi, and welcome to episode 4 of the DevelopSec podcast. I'm your host, James Jardine, and today I think we're going to talk a little bit about the way we do testing from a security standpoint and some of the tools that we use, because oftentimes many people don't really understand how it is that from a pen tester standpoint we can actually test these applications and do things that maybe you can't see through the browser if we're talking about a web application, or that you can't see because it's a mobile application, or how the attackers actually come about doing this. So I thought we'd talk a little bit about the techniques that are used, some of the tools that are used, and some interesting new tools that have actually been just recently released to help test some of these applications. Because from both a developer standpoint, where I have to understand how attackers attack so I can really understand how I can protect my applications, to if I'm a pen tester, what tools am I using if I'm looking to just do security on my own or get into the idea of security. How are people doing these things so I can better understand what it means when I see things on the news about how things are being attacked. So one of the coolest things that I use during my daily tests is what's called a web proxy. There's multiple different web proxies out there, and the idea behind a web proxy is it's sort of like creating a man in the middle. And what I mean by man in the middle is I now have inserted myself between the browser, which is your interface to an application, and then the back-end server. So when you send a request up to the from the browser up to the server, it actually stops by me first. I get a chance to look at it, maybe even modify it a little bit, and then send it on its way up to the server. And then same thing when it comes back. The server sends it back, but it sends it back to me, and then I route it back to you. Sort of like thinking if, for example, you sent an envelope through the post office to somebody, you seal up your envelope, you send it off, the post office opens that envelope, reads it, looks at it, modifies it, seals it back up, and then sends it on its way. And then that recipient may take the item, send it back, right? And they're in that middle again. Now, hopefully, I'm going to hope here that the post office really doesn't do this, but if you think of it in a non-technical term, that's similar to what we're talking about with this man in the middle. You've taken your package, you've sent it to somebody else before it gets to the original destination, and now they've had a chance to modify that. And oftentimes people get concerned when they actually first see this, because they think that it's possible that, I'm sitting in the coffee shop, but all my traffic can just be intercepted and manipulated. And that's not necessarily true. There are some roadblocks we'd have to go through to actually be able to do that. So I want to talk just briefly about some of the different tools that we have available for proxying. My favorite tool that I use all the time is called Burp Suite, and it's actually more than just a proxy. It actually contains lots of other different tools. It's got a tool called Intruder, it's got Repeater, it's got a decoder, a sequential decoder. It's got all kinds of cool tools that help a pen tester do a good assessment, but they can also be used by developers or home users just to see what is actually going on with these applications. And a lot of this stuff you can do without actually taking an active stance. I don't have to manipulate parameters. I can actually use a proxy just to see what's happening. What type of ad networks does this application talk out to? What other third parties does it talk to? What type of data is it sending from my computer to the server that allows the application owners to maybe track my system or do something similar like that? So we can actually see all the requests that are going back and forth. So Burp is a great tool. It comes in 2 versions. There's a free version and a commercial version. The commercial version is not very expensive when you think of security tools. I think it runs about $299, right about $300 per year. But it is one of the best tools out there. because of the suite of products that it provides. And not only that, but just recently, Jason Gillum, who works with me over at Secure Ideas, he just released a new extension for Burp, because it is extensible, called CO2. I guess he picked the name because I guess CO2 causes burps. So kind of a little pun there. But so he's got this extension that actually adds more functionality into the tool, like taking a request and getting it all set up to then export that request so you can copy and paste it into SQL Map. So if you found something where you think there's SQL injection, you can immediately tie it to SQL Map and start running SQL Map commands. And he's got a whole bunch of different features that come included with this, with plans to add more extensions. And there are lots of other extensions out there that you can get for Burp, which make it very customizable and allows you to do a whole lot more with the tool that's just stock out of the box. Other tools that are also available, there's Zap Proxy, which is free. It's run by OWASP. Very similar to Burp in the idea that it's got a whole suite of tools in it. It's not just a proxy. There's scanners, there's comparers, all these different things that we see that's in Burp. A lot of those features also exist within Zap Proxy. So another good tool. And then finally, another one that I use more regularly. I don't use Zap Proxy very often because I like Burp. I like the interface. And it really, when it comes down to the tools you use, it's about the interface you are comfortable with and what really works for you. But I also like Fiddler. And Fiddler is written in .NET, so it only runs on Windows, whereas the other two will run on just about anything. It only runs on Windows. But it's got some pretty cool features in there as far as you can get add-ons to be able to decode and re-encode view state automatically. There's also a plugin called the Watcher plugin, which basically adds passive scanning into the Fiddler interface. And what we mean by passive scanning, and the other two products, Burp and Zap, also both have this, but with Burp it's in the paid version only. It's this ability that all it does is it watches, the tool watches the traffic going back and forth. And without manipulating anything, it just looks for what I like to call the low-hanging fruit in most situations. But kind of this low-hanging security issues. For example, you don't have autocomplete disabled on your forms, so that way users can store their the password with their username when they go back and type it in, right? So you type in your username and it auto-fills in your password. Something that we want to try to block out in most applications, especially when you're talking financial or heavily business related. So it's got the ability to see that, if you're doing cache control headers incorrectly, simple things like that, email addresses that are being displayed that shouldn't maybe be displayed, internal IP addresses. There's a whole slew of things that these will look for to look at the SSL certificates to see if there's any problems or if they're using weak cryptography. There's all kinds of things that these scanners will look for. So from a developer standpoint, not only are you getting the ability to help debug your traffic, and Fiddler's actually called the web debugging tool. And it was built for debugging, but with most things, we can convert things into using them for other purposes. But from a developer standpoint, we can use these tools to help us debug and test our applications. One, just by even just using the scanner that's attached. Hey, what type of things are popping up in our application that we can now immediately resolve without having to have some third-party company come in and tell us that autocomplete's disabled or, write this stuff up. Let's take some of these common flaws and get those passed to us. And we can start understanding, hey, I'm testing my app. Let me manipulate parameters. Let me change some of these values that I didn't think could be changed. And let me give you an example of some of those. A lot of times, I had an example with somebody where they had a frame set for their website, so multiple different URLs within one page that you can't see the address bar for all the pages. And one of those items actually had a parameter being passed in the address bar, in the URL, that they didn't assume could be manipulated because you couldn't see it, right? From the browser perspective, I can't see that URL because it's kind of hidden, right? I only see the main page URL up top. But with a proxy I now have the ability to see all the traffic that flows from that web application in the browser up to the server. So I can now see that and make those changes. Another example is hidden fields. Right? The whole purpose of them is they're hidden. They're not shown to the end user. So a lot of times developers will assume, well, it's a hidden field. Nobody can change this. And they'll put things like the price of their item in a cart in a hidden field and assume that that won't get changed. But with a proxy, it's very easy to change those values. And now I can take an item that was $20 and say that it's only going to be $2. And in many cases where developers are unaware of this ability to change this data, they assume that it's immutable and that, well, that can't be changed, so it'll stay $20. They can't manipulate that, when that's not true. Also think about headers, user agents, a lot of things that we don't see, cookies, all these things go up in the request that we can modify, but you don't actually see it as an end user, or a lot of times as a developer, we don't see those values, so we just assume they can't be changed. But by using a web proxy, we can change a lot of these. So from a developer standpoint, it's good for us to get some practice with a web proxy so we can really start to understand what really can be changed and how people go about changing these values so we can try to start protecting ourselves. When we talk about the changing of values, one of the things that all of these proxies allow is I can actually inspect SSL traffic, right? Something that's going across HTTPS. That means that what is supposed to be encrypted and secure and nobody can get, view it. Well, with my proxy, I can view that. But there's a few things we need to know about that. One, the way it does it is the proxy actually has its own certificate. And so when you go to surf to google.com and it goes through the proxy, well, the certificate you actually get is not Google's. You'll actually get the proxy. So you might get the Burp Suite certificate back. Now, what this will do is this will actually prompt the browser to tell you, hey, this certificate is not valid because you're going to a URL of google.com, but you're getting a cert back that's not for that URL. And all modern browsers now will tell you, hey, there's something wrong with this cert. Are you really sure you want to continue? Because I don't recommend it. So you have to say yes before it'll actually let you continue. Now, this is where we get into the whole issue of, hey, we don't just click yes to everything that pops up on our screen just because we want to do something, right? We need to take certificate warnings seriously because this is one of the concerns. So by default, if I'm sitting in a coffee shop and I'm surfing a site that's protected with HTTPS, somebody can't just intercept my traffic. It will be encrypted. Now, if they come up with some way to get my computer to go through there so they can try to intercept it, then my browser should prompt me and say, hey, there's something wrong with these certificates. And that should be a key indicator that, hey, wait a minute, somebody's intercepting my traffic. So don't just think that because you can see now that, hey, I intercepted that login request and I can see the password. What do I do? Of course you can see the password because you encrypted in the middle of the HTTPS. That's not the norm, right? You've got it over HTTPS. It is encrypted. It's fine. Nobody else can see that. You've gotten yourself in the middle and you've accepted and said, I understand this isn't the right certificate for this site, but I want to keep going. So just because you can see it when using your proxy doesn't mean that means, oh, no, the password's out there at plain text. Anybody can get it. That's not true. So proxies create a lot of great instance for us. Now, QA people, right, as we're doing QA testing, being able to run through a proxy looking for things that shouldn't be out there, being able to manipulate parameters, as I mentioned, hidden fields, referrers, user agents, cookies. Doing a QA test, we should be manipulating some of these things to make sure that the application behaves in the way that we expect it to behave. From a pen tester's standpoint, right, we spend most of our time in a proxy. This is where manual pen testing is done because I'm looking at the raw request and response and I'm manipulating. I'm taking out any JavaScript aspect of validation. Well, the application doesn't allow me to put in a negative value for a price because it's got JavaScript that blocks that. But when I capture it in the proxy, it's after the JavaScript has run. So I can put in a positive value. JavaScript says, yep, this is good, I'm okay with it, sends it to my proxy, and then I change it to a negative value. And if there's no check on the server side, then we've bypassed that validation. So we want to be able to test this stuff to ensure that we are doing proper validation and that we're not missing key things that when somebody comes in to actually try to attack us, now we run into a problem. Now keep in mind, we can't just go in and manipulate values. If I'm an end user, I just can't manipulate stuff free willy-nilly out on the web. Really, if you're an end user, it's more of just being able to say, hey, I just want to kind of see what's going on with it. How does this application work? As far as manipulating stuff and testing stuff and trying to break stuff, that stuff all requires a contract with you and the company. Oftentimes it requires, that you have some form of insurance in case you break their stuff. So don't just go out and test away, right? Make sure that if you are doing stuff, you have permission from people. If you want to be able to test stuff and get familiar with the proxy, I encourage you to download Samurai WTF, which is a framework that's built up. It's got some target websites on it that are vulnerable. It comes with Burp installed. I believe Zap Proxy is on there installed as well, where you can actually fire up this live environment and start learning about how this proxy works and intercept some of the traffic and play with the traffic without doing something that may cross the legal borders and get you in a whole heap of trouble. We don't want that. We want to make sure everybody is aware of what's going on and understand how these tools work so they're better prepared for when they're actually out using systems and they see a certificate error or something like that. They can better understand what to do with it, how to deal with it properly so they don't open themselves up to bigger risk. So everybody go out, check out some of these web proxies that are out there. It's very interesting, especially if you're developers. Get familiar with a web proxy. Download Fiddler, download Burp, download Zap Proxy, but understand really the details of how these requests and responses flow back and forth and what you can do with them, what you can't do with them, because it'll definitely help you start making better, more secure applications. And check out some of the cool extensions that are out there. The CO2 one is pretty cool. We see lots of traction with it. Lots of people are liking that, and there's a whole bunch of other extensions out there. I'll post some links with this podcast as well, so that way you have some ideas of where to go to get some of these items. So that wraps up this week's episode of the DevelopSec podcast, and we will be back again next week. Thank you. You have been listening to the DevelopSec podcast with James Jardine. Follow us on Twitter at DevelopSec and visit our website at www.developsec.com for more episodes and information.